I'm really excited to turn this over to our speaker, Eileen. So Eileen, without further delay, thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. All right, guys, give me 1 second. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining How to Do Paid Digital Ads today. I'm your host, Eileen. I am in Greater Boston, actually in Salem, though usually I work in the Seaport, so it's really easy for me to pop in and out of like downtown Boston. I wrote this little profile for myself that's like a typical marketing persona that you might see. So in terms of my age bucket, I'm just sticking with 18 to 35. You know, like we don't really need a real actual nominal age for that, right? And I've been in marketing for the past 10 years. I've worked at companies such as TechTarget, a B2B tech media company, BrainShark, sales enablement, video tracking company, Evergage, marketing personalization platform, and then now Zerto, disaster recovery and backup company. So in terms of interest, I really like the tech space, both in my personal and professional life. Love to know about new gadgets and kind of like to stay up to date on those trends. I love photography as well, especially filters and Photoshop, cannot lie. And I've recently taken up sewing, partially because of the COVID situation that we're all in. But I am volunteering some time to sew masks for friends and family. So if you want tips on that, you could also hit me up during happy hour. And you can often find me in terms of like hanging out at my watering holes on Quora, Reddit, Yahoo News, and LinkedIn. And this kind of pertains to, you know, we're going to talk about audience targeting. So it's really important to know where your target audience is kind of spending most of their time. So now I'm going to also ask everyone in the audience, if you feel comfortable, please keep introducing yourselves in the chat room, get to know one another. Feel free to have side conversations, totally okay. And I'm going to ask Stephanie to also release a quick poll, which has 2 questions that will just help us to learn more about what people might want to learn more about in this session, and kind of like where you're at in terms of like your planning stages, if you will.
Definitely. So I'm going to launch the first question first on this end, Eileen, because I actually uploaded into 2 polls. So I'm doing the first one, and it's live in terms of what you want to learn the most, and then I can definitely do the second one right after.
All right. And Stephanie, will we see the results immediately, or?
Yep. So after, I'm going to close the poll in about 15 seconds here, and then I'll share the results so you and everyone else can view them. Yeah, guys, if you haven't put together, we're all still learning the Zoom webinar lifestyle right now. All right, guys, I'm closing the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, here are the results about what people would like to learn the most about. So it looks like most people are definitely getting started with ads and then also kind of optimizing channels. Perfect. And Eileen, should I launch the second one as well now?
Yes, please. Let's do that one too.
All right, guys. So let's do the second one. 2 moments. And in terms of, this is all about what you're looking to invest monthly in digital ads. So these polls are open. So we're going to give you guys about like 30 seconds again to submit your answer. I'm actually super curious, Eileen, like kind of what people need to expect for a monthly budget. So I can't wait until that part of this.
Yes. And this is the last question. It's just kind of like to set like the stage for like everyone to kind of know if you're already doing it or like, you know, where you are in that journey.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. All right, guys, these polls are going to be closed in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, and polling and sharing the results here.
Awesome. Yeah, so it looks like we have a lot of people just starting out, but sounds like there's also a number of you guys who maybe are in the beginning of like launching ads and testing things out, or maybe have already had things running for a while and you're looking to improve. So this is a great audience. You know, we have a good mix of people, but please forgive me if I kind of like speak to many different concerns in terms of like what people want to learn about. So because we have kind of a mixed audience here. So kicking us off, as you guys kind of read in the little intro when you're signing up, we're going to attempt to cover all of this really quickly. You know, it's a lot to cover in less than an hour. So we're going to briefly touch upon all of these topics, hopefully, and then leave some time for a Q&A. So without further ado, let's get started with the introduction to what is online or digital advertising. So the textbook definition, which I totally ripped off from Wikipedia, just kind of like, you know, first thing that everyone looks up in terms of definition. Online advertising, which is also known as online marketing, digital or web advertising, and commonly referred to just as PPC or pay-per-click, as that's a very common way for people to manage these kind of advertising campaigns. It's a form of marketing and advertising which uses, of course, the internet to deliver our promotional messages to our audiences. So some of the things that are included in this bucket are email marketing, which we're not going to really discuss today, search engine marketing, digital social media marketing, display advertising, mobile advertising, and also native advertising. So at the very core of it is you have a publisher who is kind of gathering the audience together, who is consuming content, whether that's social media or business articles or, you know, like a public forum. They're asking each other questions and engaging with each other. You have a publisher who you're working with closely as the advertiser to both target the audience and then also to deliver your own messages to them, whether that's in the form of a display banner ad or like a promoted sponsored post, which I'm sure everyone has seen before, or a video or something else that's like interactive. So that's kind of like the basics of what we are covering in terms of like digital advertising. And then moving on to why digital ads. So number one is compared to many other traditional forms of marketing, digital advertising is actually very cost effective. You know, we talked about in the description how you could potentially get a lead or a prospect who is interested in your products for as low as, you know, a couple dollars, versus like a traditional form of advertising like TV or like a billboard. You'd have to shell out thousands of dollars, or like even like an event, you know, you would still need to pay for food and kind of like invite a ton of people. So in comparison to all these other channels, digital is actually very, very cost effective. The other thing to keep in mind is it's very measurable, simply because of the means. You know, everything that we do online is tracked, and there is this sense of also transparency in terms of like the advertising platforms and the means in which you get delivered the lead, you know, people interacting with your brand. All of that is very visible, and it's not as kind of intangible as like, say, a radio ad, or like if someone's passing out flyers. You don't really get that feedback loop, which you do actually with digital ads. The other thing is that digital ads are very versatile. You know, we've talked a little bit about like banner ads, videos. You see occasionally like surveys, all sorts of forms of ways in which you can engage with your audience. And in terms of like repurposing your content across channels, you know, it's very easy to take one video and then promote it across 10 different channels, no problem. Targeting, targeting wise, it's related to the measurability and all the wealth of data that, could be good or bad, but is being collected about everything that we do online in order to deliver more personalized experiences and better services to us. So we'll dive into definitely the wealth of information that is available as an advertiser when you are targeting digital ads. The other thing is just the reach. There's billions of people online. At any given moment in time, you can reach someone in Asia, you can reach someone in Africa, you can reach someone, in Antarctica if they had Wi-Fi there. So there's really no limit, and that's one of the great things. You're not limited by time or geography, and you can really reach anyone with an internet connection. The other thing is just the speed to deployment, So you could potentially hop off this session and get up and running in an hour if you wanted to start targeting Facebook ads to your audience, versus, a lot of other types of marketing takes some time. You might need to print some promotional materials. You might need to engage with a third party to host a webinar, things like that. Those all take a lot more time versus the self-service model of many of these digital advertising platforms make it super easy to deploy very quickly and see results. So in terms of goals, we're going to talk about goals in a way that kind of touches upon campaign goals, and then also more broadly your journey goals, and then how that aligns to the business. So, I'm sorry, one click too many. So when we think about setting up goals for our advertising campaigns, it's important to keep in mind that each campaign is geared towards helping your prospective customer or maybe existing customer, depending on what stage of the journey that you're targeting, where you want to make an impact in terms of helping to drive revenue for your business. So each campaign is geared towards moving someone along that journey. But in each campaign, you also have sort of stages in which you are very quickly trying to accomplish several goals. And those are the things that you're really optimizing for when you are looking at whether the campaign is performing well or not and what you can do about it. So we'll talk about performance optimization later. But simply put, when someone sees an ad on Facebook, the first thing that happens is, they maybe quickly see the ad, you caught their attention, whether that was a cute image or kind of a big call to action button, and then they start reading it, they take interest in what you're saying. And then during the course of that, maybe very brief 10-second interaction, they're then moved to either take the additional action that you are suggesting to them, or they kind of move on and, you try again with another type of interaction. And so by nature of them taking that action, whether it's downloading a free trial, purchasing something that they had been previously looked at, but maybe they abandoned, they are then taking the next step in also their journey with you. And, potentially moving from one stage to another where they are now more and more familiar with your brand, trusting of your brand, and also spending hopefully more money with you and happy with your services. So the things that we really want to optimize for at the end of the day are, we want to make sure that every dollar that we're spending is bringing in equal or more revenue for the business, right? Because otherwise, why would we kind of do this campaign? And then the other thing is, we also want to then long-term reduce the amount that we are spending to acquire these audiences, because ideally what would happen is as your audience, grows and they start engaging with you of their own volition, you kind of like pull them into email tracks because maybe at one point they gave you their email. And, like they also at that loyalty and advocacy level, they start promoting you to other people. So not only do they, like love your brand and like to shop with you or like to use your services, but they also start introducing other people to your brand for you. So you're spending less on paid over time to acquire new audiences. So that's the dream, that's the goal. And, we can break down these, this kind of operation into many different steps in terms of like mini goals of like, okay, we want to get this many people to engage in this ad for the reasons of, potentially generating this revenue. But at the end of the day, these are our high level goals. All right. So in order to kind of like address people in the audience who might be at different stages as well, I have this thing where it's crawl, walk, crawl, run, and kind of like different tips or suggestions that I'm going to periodically insert into kind of like my closing remarks on the topic. You can also think of it as build, iterate, scale, if that's kind of like the terminology that you might be more on that side of like the technology or like the startup language. But yeah, some of the key takeaways from this sort of like beginning of this, figuring out your goals and figuring out what your business needs in order to keep growing, is figuring out your target personas and your target customers. This is super important, and it will feed into everything else that you do, of course, in marketing. So hopefully that is something that is constantly in discussion, is formalized in some way, and that everyone who you're working with can refer back to that. And it makes it super easy to then apply to all of your advertising campaigns. The other thing to do is to make sure to have agreement on what the goals are, both at a high level and at specific campaign levels, to like make sure that everyone is on the same page, especially when it comes to measuring both the campaign success and the overall success of your marketing strategies and marketing mix. This is super important. I cannot stress this enough because I think that we'll dive into this more later on, but you'd be surprised at the differences even amongst your own team about what they would consider successful or not. And some people may value some things that are harder to measure. So for example, like brand awareness versus like some things that are like very concrete, such as, the actual direct conversion of someone clicking through and then immediately filling out the form, versus like someone who clicks through, does not immediately convert, but is what we would call like a view through conversion, and they convert later on, maybe in another visit. And then last of all, I just want to touch on mapping out the entire buying journey and then kind of tailoring your different campaigns to each stage. That's definitely, it's always a work in progress. I think that even if you're a company that has been in business for like a dozen years, you'll find that we're constantly evolving and constantly trying to understand what our buyers are doing and how we can best message on every single level. All right. So elements in a digital ad campaign. This may be very basic for many of you, but I just want to make sure to cover our basics. So like we said, we need a defined goal. We need to know what we want to accomplish. We need to have our target audience and, just some examples of what might be in those criteria for your target audience, like where they're located, what kind of behavior they're exhibiting, and like how you can best address their challenges with your solution, right? So like we know that if they have that particular pain point, they're much more likely to be interested in your company. Budget, which we'll talk about in a second. Ad copy, banners, and call to actions, which is really the meat and potatoes of your campaign. You know, it's all the graphics, and it's the landing page. It's what next step that you want them to do. Oh, sorry, skipped ahead. Landing page is also we included that separately because it's just something that is visible on the next step, right? So they first see your graphics on one platform, and then they go to your own your own property. So like they're coming from wherever they were spending their time before, that third-party platform, and then they're coming to your property. And then finally, the reporting and conversion tracking, which is super important in order to be able to measure success on whether this campaign was effective in getting your target audience to do the actions that you wanted them to take. All right. So we're going to cover ad auctions, which is really how the majority of third-party platforms that, publishers and ad networks, the way that they determine which advertisement to show to their audience is through an ad auction, because they all have limited inventory. There's only so much traffic that they have themselves, even if that's millions and millions of users. They do have a limited amount of ad space, and they have a limited amount of eyeballs or impressions being delivered. So to determine whether or not they show your ads, they basically use some complicated algorithms, but they are taking into account how much each advertiser is willing to pay, and then kind of like trading that off with, with how effective it is. Because another thing that they have to keep into account is they need to keep their audience happy. So, their audience, they want to serve the most relevant ads to their audience so that, people don't get angry about like getting things that they don't view as relevant to them. So diving a little bit deeper into what goes into that auction, it's a little bit different from what we typically consider an auction to be. It's not just highest price or highest bidder. What we see is that because of that consideration for their audience and kind of keeping in mind their long-term growth, what they want to do is they also want to take into account some way of grading how relevant or what quality is your ad to judge that kind of like more subjectiveness of whether your messaging is suitable for that audience. So this is just a quick example of what kind of scenarios might play out and how the highest bid may not always be the winner of the auction. So again, the winner of the auction is every single time it's serving up an ad, there's that auction happening in the background. It's super quick. And it is determining, are you going to see this advertisement for, furniture that you looked at the other day and abandoned, or are you going to see this ebook that you were researching a business solution for your company, and this business company wants to target you to help educate you further about that particular business challenge. So in this example, you kind of see that advertiser 4 is bidding, willing to pay $8 and would have outbid every single other advertiser, but their quality score is actually the worst out of all of the other advertisers. So in terms of the ranking that they get, so like the third-party advertiser is putting a subjective score onto all of them to say like, hey, you know, I have maybe 5 spots on this particular page. Which 5 ads should I show? Because most of the time it's, you know, it could just be one ad, but sometimes there are several placement areas. So then they would say, okay, we'll take the top 5. And so if you know, unfortunately, if your score is not high enough to get into the top 5, that means that your ad will not show at that particular time. So in this case, we see that potentially, you know, they all might get different shares of this audience impressions, but we also see that they pay different prices, and it's not exactly what they set out as their max bid. So because they're in competition with each other, and there's the quality score is kind of modifying what each advertiser has to pay, you see that some of them end up paying a little bit more and some of them end up paying a little bit less. So that's the key point of this kind of example over here. All right, moving on. So in terms of practical application, what does that mean for us understanding what an ad auction entails? So what it really boils down to is we have to enter in our target audiences and play around with the parameters that the ad auctions set for us. So when you get hands-on into these applications, you will see that there's usually a recommended minimum bid, and then the maximum bid is set by, you know, unfortunately, your own budget, because you know, some of these bids can get very high when you're competing with perhaps larger companies with larger budgets. And the other thing to keep in mind is, so once we kind of know what is possible, then we want to do our utmost to optimize the parts that we can control, which is in this case the quality or relevance score, because, you know, as we know, budget is hard to finagle, but what we can try to optimize is our copy, our images, the landing page conversion, to try and make sure that we are very highly relevant to the audience, and the audience is converting on our offer in terms of like completing those actions and telling the advertising platform that this is something that they actually are interested in. Last of all, we can also adjust the bid strategies based on our past performance data. And this is kind of a run thing, because if you don't have data yet, then obviously this is not really possible for you, or, you know, it's something that you really have to look at how some of the campaigns performed in terms of different metrics to figure out how to adjust the bidding the best way to maximize that return. All right, so in terms of ad channels, we're going to go really quickly through some of these because I have a feeling that everyone is very familiar with all sorts of advertising. And I have to kind of admit, I dug up some of my own ads. So these are things that were being promoted to me. And so my guilty thing is I have to admit that I had to turn off my ad blocker to do this. I was like, wow, I've never seen these ads before, but this is what I'm being targeted for. So this was across a variety of channels, and you know, it was funny to see them because some of them I knew why they were targeting me. Others I kind of dug in, and you can always click on those 3 buttons, and then nowadays with a lot of privacy and data regulations, the advertisers are required to kind of tell you why they're targeting you. And that's super helpful to us as advertisers, because sometimes if you see an ad that you like and you're curious, you can also maybe glean some insights into what other people are doing without, you know, being able to directly ask them. So the other piece here is, because of all these ads that we're getting them everywhere, they're following us around. I really cannot stress enough that you have to be where your audience is. So for example, if you are a B2B company, as we kind of saw, many of you guys in the audience are, you know that there are certain channels that work better for a B2B audience, simply by nature of when people are in the mindset to think about business, you know, when they're actually researching business solutions, and what is easier for you to target in terms of like the targeting conditions specifically. So for B2B, of course, LinkedIn, hands down, we all know that it's way easier to target someone on LinkedIn, especially if they're a net new audience and you don't know who they are, they've never interacted with you. It's actually extremely hard to do that on some other platforms, including, you know, in my own experience, Facebook and Twitter is pretty difficult because you don't get that level of sort of like firmographic and particular demographic information, like what that person's occupation or title is, or seniority. So very quickly, you know, like obviously there's a lot of different social media channels, and you know, there's just some that are easier to target for specific purposes, and ones that are kind of like, you know, you can find everyone. So for right now, I'm still including Facebook on this list, because unless your audience is like, you know, under 18, they are probably still on Facebook. Anyway, we can talk more about this in the Q&A section, so we're gonna just quickly pass over this. So in terms of search paid advertising, you know, everyone knows Google, largest search engine, of course. There's Bing, which we should not discount yet, but there's also ones to keep in mind, such as search engines that people are searching for products, searching for services that you wouldn't normally think of, but that may actually apply to your business. So for example, Amazon actually has a lot of advertising and has a lot of pull in terms of this search world. You know, like when you search for products now, I don't know about you guys, but I have two destinations, Google search, and I actually use their shopping section, and also Amazon, of course, because you can find everything on Amazon. I also want to mention Google Play, and let's see if my other button came up. Say, yes, and Apple, in terms of like iTunes and like the App Exchange as well. So these are also areas in which, you know, people are searching for something specific, and those platforms have also taken steps to, you know, offer a way for advertisers to like get a leg up on everyone else. So that's something to keep in mind. I did this quick search for cat shirts on Amazon, and you can see the first thing you actually see is a sponsored ad, and it's you can kind of tell because it said ad feedback down here. And just another one to keep in mind, Yelp. I searched cat shirts, but I didn't find anything, of course. And then I just searched cat. So when I searched cat, you know, best cat in Boston pops up, and it's actually this advertisement for this urgent care vet clinic, but you can see that's also a sponsored result. All right, so native and digital advertising. I lump these in a separate bucket simply because these are not confined to one particular channel or kind of like watering hole, if you will, but they're really across a ton of different publishers, a ton of different sites, and you will constantly see ads that are like kind of inserted into different properties that you're visiting. So the platforms that do this service, you know, Google Display Network, of course, Outbrain, you might have seen some of those. Recommended content at the very bottom of some of the pages that you visit. So like if you're constantly like on, I think, Business Insider and Forbes and things like that, you know, they want you to consume different content. Discuss and Taboola, they're ones I'm less familiar with, but did pop up in my research. So here's an example of some of the recommendations that you might see from these platforms, and they kind of live everywhere. And their purpose is to really, you know, drive you to a different site. So that's just all we're talking about. And they look more, so display advertising, you know, that can still contain banners and everything, but native advertising is special in that a lot of times it looks a little bit more integrated into the site. So if you weren't paying close attention, you might think that that is being recommended by the site you're currently on. And this one from Microsoft is an example from Reddit, which looks like a Reddit post. It's super casual, super integrated. You know, it is Microsoft, so it's very obvious, but you can imagine that if there were some other ones that were, you know, a little bit more consumer-ish, maybe you would think that maybe someone had posted that instead of a company posting it. All right, so let's get back to our special tips. So I want to emphasize, focus on 1 or 2 channels to fine-tune your audience targeting first. I know it's really overwhelming. Everyone wants to do every single channel at the same time. You know, they think that you have to be everywhere. You actually don't have to be everywhere. You know, it's almost impossible. And the important thing is to really focus on who you are targeting and try and maximize your opportunities with those people, even if you're not able to capture 100% of market share, which is impossible, right? That share of voice. It's always something that's, you know, there's always going to be someone with more money than you, let's put it that way. So you want to really research and build out your keywords, things that you know that people are searching for to try and find to your solution, even if they don't know who you are. What competitors are doing / who they actually are. You know, sometimes you'll be surprised. And to really build out these audience lists of like who is already engaged with you and who you want to engage with. So for the B2B audiences out there, you know, this includes like target account lists and, you know, like lists where you might be already have like developed them for different reasons. You know, it could be like partners, it could be people that you've met at events, all of that good stuff. Research all your placements and apply your learnings from other channels to power your campaigns. So what I mean by this is it was just like a quick note about where your ads are showing up. So when you get feedback about your ad campaign, you know, I'm talking specifically about maybe you're showing across publishers. It sometimes is really important to look at where you're showing, because you might then be like, oh no, God, I do not want to be showing there. Oh no, I'm showing in a bunch of mobile ads. And you know, there's some things called click fraud, or like things that are a little bit more shady, where you're like, oh, these aren't really interested people, or like they're accidentally clicking. And you know, have you ever been in a mobile app that's powered by ads, and then you're like, I keep pressing that darn banner accidentally, and you don't mean to do that, right? And that's one of the things that we want to avoid. So when we kind of advance beyond that, we want to apply learnings from our audience targeting to create better content as well, to power these campaigns. So what I mean by that is, you might discover that there is benefit to targeting specific audiences by industry or by particular interests, and you want to create that content for them that's really tailored to that particular audience. You also want to do your best to reduce any wasted spend. You know, I kind of mentioned cleaning up anything that's like unwanted traffic, but you want to utilize several different ways to do that. Placements is just one of them. You can also exclude audiences. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And experiment with different offers and do your best to improve your rankings through those offers and that combination of content and your bidding. Last of all, this is related as well. So you want to monitor your incoming traffic and conversions and really dive deep into the analytics to figure out what's working and what's not working. So in terms of our more advanced users, definitely experiment with different goals for different audiences. We touched upon different stages that people might be in. So when you're running these advertising campaigns, you might have several levels of these ads running at the same time. You might be retargeting people who have visited your site before with one form of offer and several different call to actions there. So you may want them to engage with you in like a demo, download your free trial, potentially run like a analysis that would help them to decide to move forward with your company. And with like people more in the awareness stage, perhaps, you'd want them to just become more familiar with your brand, more trusting, and to learn more about the challenges that they may or may not know that they're experiencing. So it might be offers like ebook or like an infographic, might be completely ungated and just going to a blog post. So turning on automation rules, if they are available in that third-party platform, Google has a ton of different ways in which you can set automated rules to increase your bid or like to show at different times, to reallocate your spend across a group of campaigns, things like that. So getting into even more fine-tuning options is one of those things where you don't have to do it all at once. And in fact, it's again better to wait for the data to then tell you what else you might want to fine-tune. Last of all, there's this movement, you guys may have seen it, towards more customized and dynamic content for ads that are not being curated by someone. They may have just been populated by the last thing that you were doing with them, or it may be pulling in specific things about you. There's some cool even like video advertising, which the example of it is like those Facebook timeline videos, which you're like, wow, they made this video for me. No, they didn't. They pulled in your data and they personalized parts of that video based on what they know about you, which is really cool, really dynamic, and totally automated. So not every single platform offers that, but it is really cool when you encounter something where, like, for example, LinkedIn, you can insert that person's company logo, for example, and that's something that you can definitely do.
And Eileen, we are coming up on our time, so just want to make
sure.
I know.
I'm sorry.
You're on
totally in that.
I want to cut you off.
Yes. I think that this is unfortunate. I'm sorry, guys. I spent a little bit too much time on some of the other things. I do want to try and cover this budget setting because I think that this is definitely a tricky issue. Stephanie, how much more time do I have, actually?
I'm over. This in like 5 minutes, and then we gotta end.
All right. So these slides will be available for you guys, I believe. We will find some way to distribute. So one of the things that people want to be able to calculate is, how do I know whether to keep running these ads or not? And what's my ideal budget? How much should I bid? This is a way in which you ideally would calculate based on how much the customer is worth to you and like what would be your break-even cost. Unfortunately, a lot of times people don't know. It's hard to do. And what ends up practically happening is people have a budget and then they work backwards from what the limitations are, like how much you actually have to bid in order to show up on some of these platforms, and then figure out if it makes sense for, like, the business target that they're trying to hit, and whether that ROI makes sense for them. So unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't make sense, in which case, you know, like the bid is too high for you, then you would not run that ad. I'm going to end here. I'm so sorry I didn't get to cover everything. I spent a little bit too much time on some of the beginning slides.
No, there is nothing to apologize for. I think if anything, since I know that there are a couple of questions we couldn't get to, we're just going to have you back sometime. We're going to rope you on in. So thank you.
Yes, guys, I will be on for happy hour, by the way. I'm so sorry. I wish I could have covered all of it, but hopefully you guys got something out of this, and then we'll talk more soon.
Perfect. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming out. I did drop the info for the next event, which is all about SEO, here in 12 minutes. So hope to see you there. And Eileen, thank you so much again. Just going to have to rope you in to come back. All right, guys, We'll see you in like 10 minutes. Bye.